There are moments in the Naruto story where one decision, one fleeting choice, could change the course of everything. The night Sasuke Uchiha chose to leave the hidden leaf was one of those moments. It was a wound that scarred Naruto, Sakura, Kakashi, and the entire village. It was a choice that set Sasuke down a path of vengeance, hatred, and endless wandering. But what if he hadn't left? What if, on that night, when the Sound Four appeared, and the temptation of Orochimaru whispered in his ears, Sasuke instead decided to stay? In this reimagined story, Sasuke remains in Konoha. He still carries the burden of his clan's massacre, still seethes with resentment toward Itachi, and still longs for power strong enough to avenge his family. But the bonds he has built, fragile but real, with Team 7, are enough to hold him back from abandoning everything. In this version of events, Naruto's words that night echo louder. His desperate plea, his raw determination not to let Sasuke slip into darkness, touches something deep inside. Sasuke looks into Naruto's eyes and sees not only rivalry, but a bond unshakable, a promise that power doesn't have to be sought in solitude. So he stays. And from this moment onward, the story of Konoha begins to shift in ways both subtle and enormous. The first change is Sasuke's training. With Orochimaru denied his prized vessel, Sasuke never falls into the cursed seal's corruption beyond its first stages. Instead, Kakashi takes it upon himself to train Sasuke more rigorously. He knows the boy's heart is still restless, still burning with revenge, and so he decides to channel that fire rather than let it consume him. Kakashi pushes Sasuke's Sharingan to its limits. He spends long hours with him on the training grounds, refining his use of lightning chakra, building his speed and precision until Sasuke becomes a prodigy among prodigies. Unlike before, Sasuke's growth is tempered by steady guidance rather than the poisonous whispers of Orochimaru. Naruto too continues to grow, and with Sasuke at his side, the rivalry sharpens into something constructive. Each mission, each sparring match, becomes a new test. Sasuke drives Naruto to refine his Rasengan faster, to control his chakra better, to tap into the Nine Tails' power without losing himself. Naruto, in turn, challenges Sasuke to reach further than even he thought possible. The two of them form a rhythm, a balance, a mirror in which each one sees both his own strengths and his own shortcomings. The Chunin exam's aftermath still weighs on Sasuke's mind. He remembers the humiliation of being helpless before Gaara's monstrous power and Itachi's Tsukuyomi. But instead of running to Orochimaru, Sasuke channels that frustration into discipline. Under Kakashi, and with constant sparring against Naruto, he begins to break new ground. His mastery of Chidori grows, but so does his understanding of tactical combat. With Naruto beside him, Sasuke develops an adaptability that sets him apart from other Uchiha of the past. Team 7 itself becomes something more cohesive. Sakura, inspired by her teammates' growth, commits herself to training under Tsunade even earlier, determined not to fall behind. Her medical ninjutsu blossoms, her strength builds, and the trio gradually grows into a formidable unit. Missions that once tested their resolve now seem to be handled with near-flawless teamwork. Their bond deepens, not in spite of Sasuke's pain, but because of it. His teammates understand the darkness he carries, and in their own ways, they help him bear it. Yet the shadows never vanish. Itachi is still out there. The Akatsuki are still moving, and Sasuke still dreams of revenge. But in this timeline, his choices are no longer made alone. Instead of wandering into the darkness by himself, Sasuke drags his teammates into the storm with him. This changes everything. When Akatsuki begins their hunt for the Jinchuriki, Konoha responds with greater strength than before. Not only do they have Naruto, but Sasuke too, an Uchiha trained, tempered, and sharpened within the village rather than outside it. Missions that once seemed desperate now hold a greater chance of success. Itachi himself becomes aware that his younger brother has not gone astray. Instead of chasing rumors of Sasuke allied with Orochimaru, Itachi hears whispers of Sasuke standing proud as a leaf shinobi, becoming stronger not through forbidden power, but through bonds. This knowledge unsettles him. For Itachi, whose mission has always been to protect Konoha by isolating himself as a villain in Sasuke's eyes, this shift is dangerous. He knows that a Sasuke who remains tied to his comrades may unlock the Mangekyo Sharingan through bonds rather than through loss. Such a path could create a new kind of Uchiha, one whose power is not born solely of hatred. Itachi begins to watch more closely, torn between pride and fear for what this means. Back in Konoha, the dynamic between Naruto and Sasuke becomes legendary, even before either of them achieves their greatest power. To the villagers, they are rivals destined for greatness, always sparring, always growing stronger. To each other, they are both a wall to climb and a hand to hold. Their teamwork begins to rival even that of the fabled Sannin in their youth. Slowly but surely, the leaf begins to feel a shift. Where once it feared the curse of the Uchiha name, now it sees hope in Sasuke's presence. His victories in battle, his loyalty to his comrades, his relentless drive, these things begin to restore faith in the clan that was nearly wiped from existence. Sasuke, without realizing it, begins to redeem his family's name in the eyes of the village. And yet, always, there is the looming shadow of the future. Orochimaru, denied his vessel, grows more desperate, more erratic. The Akatsuki, facing unexpected resistance, accelerate their plans. And Itachi, quietly suffering in the dark, wonders if his brother will still hate him enough to finish what must one day be finished. For now, though, Sasuke is still in Konoha. And because of this, the bonds that would have broken are instead growing unshakable. And with every passing day, the story diverges further from the one we once knew. Sasuke's decision to remain in the village was not one he made lightly. The nights following Itachi's reappearance were filled with unrest, with visions of his brother's cold eyes haunting his dreams. But unlike the path he once took, fueled by Orochimaru's manipulative promises, here he chose the path of patience, of perseverance within the village walls. And though his desire for vengeance burned bright, his loyalty to Naruto, Sakura, and even to Kakashi anchored him. It was through this tether that his growth truly began to take on a different form, one that was steadier and ultimately even stronger. Under Kakashi's direct supervision, Sasuke began to train in ways that refined his natural gifts, pushing the limits of the Sharingan in controlled but demanding environments. Kakashi saw within him the potential to rival not just any shinobi of his generation, but perhaps even the greatest Uchiha who had come before him. And he made it his quiet mission to shape Sasuke into something beyond the bitterness of vengeance. It began with control. Sasuke's mastery of the Sharingan had always been impressive for his age, but it was still raw and reactive, a tool he used mostly in battle rather than something he shaped deliberately. Kakashi taught him to train the eye itself, how to extend his perception, how to anticipate movements before they were even born, how to minimize chakra drain while maintaining the dojutsu. These lessons were not about immediate results, but about planting the seeds for the manjikyo that lay ahead. And though Sasuke did not yet realize it, each bond he nurtured within Konoha, each sparring match with Naruto, each quiet talk with Sakura, drew him closer to unlocking that next stage. For it was loss and love alike that guided the evolution of the Uchiha eyes. Naruto, of course, was the ever-present rival. Their training became sharper, louder, more intense. Where once their rivalry had been edged with resentment, now it was tempered with mutual respect. Each time Naruto pushed himself, Sasuke responded. And each time Sasuke soared higher, Naruto found the will to chase him. Kakashi watched these two with quiet admiration, aware that their parallel growth was not simply a matter of coincidence, but destiny itself unfolding in real time. With Sasuke in the village, Naruto was no longer fighting to catch up to a memory of a teammate gone rogue. He was chasing the living, breathing presence of Sasuke at his side. And this forced him to dig deeper, to unlock new reserves of determination that might otherwise have lain dormant. The strength of their bond, far from severed, was becoming sharper and more brilliant with each passing season. It was during one of these training sessions that Sasuke first felt the flicker of something beyond his usual perception. He was sparring with Naruto, their blows fast and furious, sparks flying as Rasengan met Chidori. In that clash, Sasuke's Sharingan seemed to reach further, not only predicting Naruto's movements, but glimpsing faint possibilities of what was about to unfold, like threads of the future briefly revealed. It left him shaken, but exhilarated. Kakashi, watching from a distance, recognized the signs. This was not just a Sharingan pushed to its limits. It was the foundation for Mangekyo, a foreshadowing of the evolution that awaited him. And though Sasuke had not suffered the same kind of loss that once drove him down a darker path, the bonds he now cherished were no less intense. Love, Kakashi knew, could awaken those eyes as surely as grief. Meanwhile, Konoha began to stir with whispers of the Akatsuki. Their movements were faint at first, rumors of dangerous rogue shinobi assembling in the shadows, but the village elders took them seriously. Unlike in the timeline where Sasuke left, here Konoha faced this threat with an even stronger hand. For within its walls stood not only Naruto, bearer of the 9 tails, but also Sasuke, heir to the Uchiha's legacy, a genius who had refused to abandon his comrades. Together, they formed a shield far greater than any one shinobi could provide. And though the Akatsuki remained a distant menace, the thought of their arrival no longer seemed like a death sentence. In hushed strategy meetings, even Tsunade allowed herself the comfort of hope, knowing that these 2 boys might one day stand as Konoha's greatest defense. As the days turned into months, Sasuke's growth became impossible to ignore. His Sharingan burned brighter, his techniques sharper. The Chidori he once unleashed recklessly was now honed into precision, able to split a target in the space of a heartbeat. He began experimenting with new forms of lightning release, learning to shape and extend his chakra in ways that pushed the limits of his control. Naruto, never content to lag behind, pushed himself harder into his training with Jiraiya, balancing his bond with Sasuke with his own pursuit of power. Together, they created an environment of relentless growth, each pushing the other closer to heights that neither might have reached alone. And within Sasuke, something began to shift, a recognition that his strength was not only his own, but a reflection of the ties he had chosen to preserve. It was during a quiet evening, after a long day of training, that Sakura found Sasuke sitting atop the village wall, staring out at the horizon. She joined him, not speaking at first, just letting the silence linger between them. When she finally spoke, it was soft, almost hesitant. "You're different, Sasuke. Stronger, but calmer, too. Like you're not just chasing something anymore." Sasuke didn't reply at once, his eyes still fixed on the fading sunlight. But deep down, he knew she was right. His path of vengeance was still there, burning quietly, but it was no longer consuming him. He had chosen to walk it differently, through growth, through bonds, through patience. And though the shadow of Itachi loomed, it was no longer the only thing that defined him. In that moment, Sasuke realized something profound. Staying in Konoha had not weakened his resolve. It had strengthened it, for here he was not just the last of his clan chasing a ghost. He was a brother, a rival, a comrade, and in those roles he found a strength deeper than any darkness could offer. As the years began to stretch forward from that fateful day when Sasuke had chosen to stay in the leaf rather than abandon it for Orochimaru, the consequences of that single choice began to ripple across every corner of his life. At first, it was subtle. Missions with Team 7 took on a new kind of weight, because instead of Sasuke slowly drifting away into an abyss of isolation, he remained firmly tethered to his teammates, his rivalry with Naruto no longer poisoned by resentment, but sharpened like a blade that only grew stronger with every clash. Where once he might have seethed with jealousy at Naruto's growth, now his competitive spirit kept pace, pushing them both higher than they ever could have climbed alone. Kakashi, too, noticed it. With Sasuke remaining by his side, Kakashi invested more of himself into his pupil's growth, honing his Sharingan and teaching him techniques far earlier than he had in the original course of events. Lightning-based jutsu, battle strategy, and an advanced grasp of chakra control became the cornerstones of Sasuke's growth under Kakashi's steady hand. This bond between teacher and student deepened, and Sasuke began to trust in the idea that strength could be cultivated without abandoning the village. He still carried the pain of the Uchiha massacre in his heart, but the presence of his comrades made that burden easier to carry. And with Naruto constantly by his side, the two grew into something Konoha hadn't seen in generations. Rivals whose flames did not consume one another, but instead fed into a brighter fire. They sparred endlessly, sometimes in training grounds that echoed with the crackle of lightning and the roar of summoned clones, and other times in silence, pushing each other's stamina until they collapsed in the dirt, laughing through exhaustion. Sakura, too, benefited from this shift, as the harmony of her team gave her room to grow, rather than forcing her to patch cracks between two boys pulling in opposite directions. The Leaf Village, perhaps unknowingly, was watching the birth of its most formidable duo. When the Akatsuki began to move in earnest, this change in history started to show its true weight. In the original course of events, Sasuke's absence created a void, one that weakened Konoha's ability to respond to threats. But now, with Sasuke present and growing stronger by the day, the village had more firepower than ever. Missions that might have stretched Naruto too thin were now shared by two young prodigies whose skills complemented each other perfectly. When Gaara was captured by Deidara and Sasori, Naruto had not just Sakura and Chiyo by his side, but also Sasuke. The fight unfolded differently. Against Deidara's aerial assaults, Sasuke's precision with lightning release proved invaluable, disrupting Deidara's clay creations before they could detonate. And when they faced Sasori, it was not just Sakura trading blows within the puppet's labyrinth, but also Sasuke, darting through with the swiftness of the Sharingan, carving openings that Sakura could strike through. Together, the three succeeded in saving Gaara without quite as much loss, and Naruto came to understand that bonds, true bonds, were not just about holding people close, but about fighting alongside them to protect what mattered. As months turned into years, Sasuke's connection to Naruto began to push his Sharingan to new limits. Unlike the original path, where his pain and solitude twisted his evolution, this time it was his bond with Naruto and the intensity of their rivalry that acted as a catalyst. The Sharingan, after all, thrives on emotion, and few emotions are more potent than the fierce mixture of rivalry, respect, and camaraderie. There came a night during a mission to intercept an Akatsuki spy when Sasuke found himself on the edge of death, Naruto at his side. The moment teetered between despair and triumph, and it was there that his eyes first hinted at something greater. The tomoe of his Sharingan spun into a deeper, sharper pattern, and though he did not yet awaken the full Mangekyo, it was clear that such power was now within his reach. The difference was not that his heart was broken, but that his bonds had grown too strong to be severed. The village began to realize what it had gained. Two rising stars, each fierce enough to be legendary in their own right, growing together instead of apart. When Konoha faced Akatsuki infiltration, when its enemies gathered in shadows, there was now a deterrent they had not counted on. Sasuke Uchiha still loyal, still within the walls, and still growing at Naruto's side. The elders watched warily. Danzo, in particular, uneasy at the sight of an Uchiha with such strength remaining inside the village. But Hiruzen's old words about trusting in bonds still echoed through Konoha's halls. And though Itachi still lived, carrying his own dark burden, the knowledge that Sasuke had not strayed changed the timing of their inevitable encounter. Itachi could sense from afar that his brother had not lost his way. For Itachi, this altered everything. He watched from the shadows, his health waning, his mission against Akatsuki grinding forward. But somewhere in his quiet heart, there was relief. Sasuke had chosen loyalty over vengeance, and it meant that perhaps when the end came for him, his little brother would be stronger, and his sacrifice not in vain. By the time the threat of Pain's invasion loomed, the true difference of this timeline became undeniable. Where once Naruto had carried the burden almost alone, this time he had Sasuke beside him. When the sky darkened with Pain's assault and the village shook under the weight of the Deva Path's power, Konoha's defenders did not stand fractured. They stood united. And in the midst of this storm, two figures emerged side by side. Naruto, cloaked in the chakra of the Nine Tails, and Sasuke, eyes blazing with the perfected Sharingan, lightning crackling at his fingertips. Together they fought like a storm given form, weaving in and out of each other's attacks, Naruto's raw, explosive power balanced by Sasuke's precise, surgical strikes. Against the 6 paths of pain, their combined might felt almost overwhelming. And while the battle still tore at the village, the tide was shifted far earlier than in the original story, because Pain was forced to contend with not one chosen child of prophecy, but 2 prodigies who had grown together like twin flames. And so, the dream of what could have been was slowly taking shape. A Konoha, where Sasuke's absence had never hollowed out the hearts of those he left behind. A Konoha, where he stood shoulder to shoulder with Naruto, not as an enemy, but as the brother he had chosen. With Sasuke remaining in the village, time continued to flow differently than in the world we know. As Naruto pursued his training under Jiraiya, delving into the deep and volatile reserves of the Nine Tails, Sasuke stayed under the steady, watchful guidance of Kakashi. Their training sessions were intense and constant, almost daily. Kakashi understood more than anyone the dangerous mix of ambition and grief within Sasuke, and with Orochimaru's shadow no longer hanging over him in the same way, there was a clarity to the boy's growth. Kakashi did not hold back. He introduced Sasuke to more advanced uses of lightning release, shaping his Chidori into versatile forms that extended beyond a simple, piercing thrust. He taught Sasuke how to conserve chakra, how to read opponents with the subtlety of an experienced shinobi, and most importantly, how to temper his emotions so they did not cloud his Sharingan's perception. The Leaf Elders, who in another reality would have quietly monitored Sasuke as a potential liability, now saw him as an invaluable pillar of the village's future. His growth was undeniable, his loyalty firm, and his potential limitless. Alongside Naruto, he represented not only raw power, but balance. Naruto's unyielding optimism paired with Sasuke's sharp precision. Together, they were becoming weapons and shields for the village, stronger because they were never separated. As the years passed and the Akatsuki began to move in the shadows, Sasuke's presence in Konoha altered the course of several key events. When Gaara, the Kazekage, was abducted by Deidara and Sasori, the rescue mission carried an entirely different dynamic. In the true history, Naruto, Sakura, and Kakashi had been stretched to their limits, with Chayo's sacrifice sealing the victory. But here, Sasuke stood shoulder to shoulder with them. His lightning release countered Deidara's clay bombs, and his Sharingan tracked the subtle movements of the enemy with precision. Though Gaara's capture still shook them deeply, the battle concluded more swiftly with Sasuke's aid. And when Chiyo gave her life to bring Gaara back, Sasuke was forced to confront something that lingered in his mind for days afterward. The power of bonds, the lengths to which even a stranger would go for someone they cared about, and the ways people could choose to defy the cycle of hatred. It reminded him of his own family, of the emptiness they had left behind, and in a quiet way, it began to shape how he viewed his role in Konoha. When word reached them that Itachi was moving openly again, Sasuke's world narrowed. In the original tale, he had stormed ahead alone, consumed with the obsession to kill his brother. But here, with his bonds intact, he could not break away so easily. Naruto was there, steady as always, vowing to fight at his side no matter what. And Kakashi, recognizing that denying Sasuke this confrontation would only lead to darker roads, agreed to accompany him. The battle with Itachi therefore unfolded under vastly different circumstances. Itachi, weakened by his illness, yet determined to draw out the truth, faced not only his younger brother, but his younger brother's comrades as well. The fight was fierce, Mangekyo illusions swirling, shuriken and jutsu clashing in an endless storm of fire and steel. Naruto's chakra gave Sasuke the support he needed to endure Itachi's Tsukuyomi, while Kakashi's sharp timing prevented the battle from tipping too far in one direction. And yet, as always, Itachi's true intention was never to kill. His motions, his strikes, all seemed designed to test, to provoke, to draw something out of Sasuke. But when the clash reached its end, when the truth of Itachi's illness and his quiet love for his brother began to bleed through his weakening frame, the revelation came differently. In this world, Sasuke did not hear his brother's final words alone. He had Naruto beside him, confused but unwavering, and Kakashi, who pieced together fragments of the larger picture. The truth that Itachi had borne the weight of the clan's massacre to protect the village, that he had chosen dishonor for the sake of peace, landed heavily on Sasuke's heart. But instead of being crushed under it, instead of spiraling into bitterness and despair, Sasuke found himself anchored by the bonds that held him in place. There were tears, quiet and unspoken, as Itachi's body faltered, his strength gone. Sasuke did not scream with rage or curse his brother's name. He simply stood there, hand trembling, feeling the gravity of what had been revealed. And in that moment, with Naruto's hand resting firmly on his shoulder, Sasuke's heart shifted. The Mangekyo Sharingan awakened, not from hatred, but from love and grief interwoven. His eyes burned with the power of his bloodline, but his spirit did not collapse into vengeance. Instead, he swore silently that he would honor his brother's truth, that he would protect Konoha not as a burden, but as a choice. From that day forward, Sasuke was not the same. His Mangekyo granted him immense power, and with Kakashi's guidance, he began to master it carefully, avoiding the blindness that came with reckless use. Naruto, in turn, drew strength from Sasuke's presence. Their rivalry, once playful and sometimes hostile, now carried a depth that drove them both to excel. Naruto saw Sasuke's new power as a challenge, and Sasuke saw Naruto's unyielding spirit as something to match. The village, for the first time in years, felt the stirring of hope, yet shadows remained. Akatsuki's plans had not ended with Itachi's death. The masked man known as Tobi continued his work, guiding the group toward the collection of tailed beasts. But here again, the timeline shifted. When Pain, the leader of Akatsuki, prepared his devastating assault on Konoha, the village was no longer vulnerable in the same way. Naruto was ready, but he was not alone. Sasuke stood with him, Mangekyo blazing, their chakra colliding like twin storms. The invasion unfolded differently. Instead of Naruto shouldering the burden of pain's power alone, he fought beside Sasuke, the two of them weaving their abilities into perfect harmony. The sight of the two, one cloaked in the Nine Tails chakra, the other wielding the terrifying precision of the Sharingan, was a force beyond imagination. Together, they clashed with pain's 6 paths, their combination overwhelming even the leader of Akatsuki. Rasengan and Chidori collided with godlike power, sealing away the bodies of pain one by one. And when Naruto sought out Nagato himself, Sasuke went with him. It was not a solitary conversation about peace and hatred. It was a dialogue between 3 souls who had all borne the weight of loss. Nagato's change of heart was influenced not only by Naruto's words, but by Sasuke's quiet testimony, his acknowledgement that even in grief, one could still choose to protect rather than destroy. The victory over pain was monumental. Konoha survived, rebuilt, and looked upon Naruto and Sasuke as its twin protectors. Bonds had held, the village had endured, and destiny was already shifting in ways no one could have foreseen. Yet the greatest challenges were still ahead, waiting in the form of war, ancient gods, and truths that lay buried in the shadows of history. The years after the battle with Orochimaru's remnants and Akatsuki's growing activity only strengthened the bond between Sasuke and Naruto. Their teamwork, honed through countless missions, became something of a legend within the Leaf. Whenever the two were seen sparring or training, younger genin would gather around the training grounds, mesmerized by the sight of 2 prodigies pushing each other to their limits. Kakashi himself, though still reserved, could not help but feel proud at how far his students had come. He often remarked, in his quiet way, that the village was safer than it had ever been, not because of its walls or its legacy, but because of the willpower of these 2 boys who carried the future upon their shoulders. Sasuke's Sharingan continued to evolve rapidly, fueled not by bitterness or hatred, but by rivalry and the desire to protect. Unlike the path he once almost walked, where darkness would have consumed him, here he grew through light and connection. Training beside Naruto meant constant challenge. Whenever Naruto would grow stronger, mastering more of the Nine Tails chakra, or refining his Rasengan into newer, more dangerous forms, Sasuke felt that familiar itch in his chest, the urge to match and surpass. But instead of resentment, this rivalry was tempered with respect. Naruto would cheer when Sasuke perfected a new jutsu, and Sasuke, though quieter, would nod in approval when Naruto revealed a breakthrough of his own. The rivalry was sharp, yes, but it was also healthy. Neither boy truly wished to destroy the other, but rather to rise together. Because Sasuke had remained in the Leaf, Itachi's situation unfolded differently as well. Though Itachi still bore the same illness, still carried the same burdens placed upon him by the clan's tragedy, Sasuke's presence in Konoha forced subtle shifts in the way events moved. The Akatsuki had anticipated his departure, expecting him to eventually fall into their grasp. But now, with Sasuke firmly rooted in the village, surrounded by comrades, and constantly sharpening his skills under Kakashi's watchful eye, their calculations were off balance. Itachi himself, though outwardly unchanged, surely felt it too. He knew his brother had chosen a different path, and deep within, though he never admitted it aloud, a quiet relief must have flickered through his heart. His dream had always been for Sasuke to live in the light, and here was proof that such a future was possible. By the time the Akatsuki began moving in earnest, capturing tailed beasts and pushing toward their ultimate plan, Sasuke was no longer the uncertain boy of old. He was now a formidable shinobi in his own right, considered one of Konoha's sharpest weapons. Missions against Akatsuki members no longer required outside reinforcements. Sasuke, alongside Naruto and their teammates, provided enough strength to hold the line. When Deidara came hunting, hoping to lure Sasuke into battle as he once did in another timeline, he instead found the full might of both Naruto and Sasuke standing together. The battle that ensued was fierce, the sky lit with explosions, Rasen Shuriken tearing through the air, while lightning crackled from Sasuke's blade. But together their strength was too much, and Deidara was subdued far earlier than anyone could have expected. The leaf rejoiced not only in the victory, but in what it symbolized: the unity of two young warriors standing side by side against the encroaching darkness. And this unity would become most evident during the invasion of pain. In the world that might have been, Naruto bore that burden alone, facing pain's overwhelming power, with only the remnants of his allies supporting him from the shadows. But here, in this world, where Sasuke never left, things unfolded differently. The Akatsuki leader descended upon the leaf, his 6 paths of pain laying waste to streets and homes, the ground shaking with each attack. Yet where destruction might once have reigned unchecked, resistance flared far brighter. The villagers still suffered, and many still fell. But now there was no moment where Naruto stood alone in the crater of despair. For beside him, Sharingan, glowing with fierce determination, was Sasuke Uchiha. Their battle with pain was unlike anything the Leaf had ever witnessed. The combination of Naruto's unyielding force and Sasuke's precise, deadly control created a rhythm the enemy could not counter. One moment, Naruto's chakra cloak surged forward, overwhelming a path with sheer brute force. And the next, Sasuke's lightning blade carved through another, their movements synchronized as though guided by some invisible thread. They did not even need to speak. Years of rivalry and training had forged an understanding deeper than words. When one faltered, the other surged forward. When one was in danger, the other was already there to shield him. The villagers, watching from the ruins, would never forget that sight. To see two boys, once thought so different, standing together against a godlike enemy, brought hope where despair might have festered. And though the battle was grueling, though Pain's abilities tested them beyond their limits, it was the bond between them that ultimately tipped the scales. Where Naruto's heart had always carried the will to never give up, Sasuke's presence gave that will sharper edges, turning it into something unstoppable. And in turn, Naruto's unwavering faith in him softened the darkness that might have still lingered in Sasuke's soul. Together, they stood as the strongest duo in history, rewriting destiny itself. The victory over pain would mark a turning point not only for them, but for the entire village. The world saw Konoha not as a village constantly on the brink of tragedy, but as a beacon of resilience, its young generation proving stronger than even the most terrifying enemies. And deep within the ruins, as the dust settled and the cries of battle faded, the bond between Naruto and Sasuke had been tempered into something unbreakable. They were rivals, yes, but they were also brothers, each completing what the other lacked. In this world, the seeds of hatred and revenge had never been allowed to grow within Sasuke. Instead, bonds had flourished. And because of that, Konoha stood stronger than ever. Yet the story was not finished, for beyond pain, darker forces still loomed. The masked man, known as Tobi, still plotted from the shadows. The truth of the Uchiha massacre still hung heavy in the air, and the threat of war lingered on the horizon. But now, the world would face those storms with a new reality. Naruto and Sasuke, side by side, prepared to face whatever destiny dared to throw at them. In the quiet aftermath of pain's destruction, Konoha was no longer the same village it had been. The streets were rebuilt, the walls were repaired, but the scars, both physical and emotional, remained. Yet at the heart of it, the people had grown stronger, their faith in Naruto and Sasuke unshaken. Together, they had stood against a godlike enemy and triumphed, their bond blazing brighter than ever. But as peace seemed to settle over the village, shadows lingered just beyond the horizon. For the Akatsuki, though wounded, had not yet been destroyed, and Madara Uchiha's grand plan still moved quietly forward. Sasuke, remaining in the leaf all this time, had been exposed to truths much earlier than he otherwise would have, in secret conversations with Kakashi, and later even with Naruto. He began to grapple with the heavy history of his clan. Itachi's sacrifice, once hidden, was now whispered between those who felt Sasuke deserved to know the full truth. The knowledge cut him deeply. Instead of hatred toward the leaf, however, this time his emotions burned in a different direction. Sasuke's heart raged at the manipulation, at the cruelty of fate, and most of all at Madara, the ghostly figure who had haunted the clan from the shadows and dragged Itachi into his schemes. Naruto, seeing Sasuke's pain, stood at his side. Their rivalry was never just about outshining one another. It was about pulling each other forward. And now, more than ever, Naruto's determination to bear Sasuke's burden was unshakable. The two were inseparable, training harder than ever under Kakashi's guidance. Kakashi, with his own pain regarding Obito and Rin, felt a certain peace in seeing his two students push each other without falling into the darkness he once feared. It was during this period of rebuilding that word began to spread of the 5 Kage summit, with Akatsuki capturing tailed beasts at an alarming rate. The great nations needed to unite, or at the very least, coordinate. In the original path of history, Sasuke had walked into that summit as an avenger, alone and consumed by anger. But here, things were different. Instead of being an enemy to the Kage, Sasuke was a representative of Konoha. He stood beside Kakashi, who now acted in place of Tsunade as Hokage while she recovered from the battle against pain. Naruto was there too, the living vessel of the 9 tails, the boy who had stood against godlike enemies and refused to bend. Together, they entered the summit not as broken individuals, but as a team. The tension in that great hall was immense. The Raikage demanded swift action against Akatsuki. The Mizukage spoke with veiled words, while the Tsuchikage muttered about the arrogance of youth. But when Naruto spoke, his words were not those of a naive boy anymore. They were measured, thoughtful, forged in fire. He told the Kage of Nagato of how even the most broken of enemies could find redemption. He asked them not to let vengeance blind them, and he promised that Konoha would not stand idle. And beside him, Sasuke's presence alone was like a quiet storm. The Kage could see his eyes, the Sharingan glimmering with potential far beyond what most shinobi could reach, and they knew Konoha was no longer a village to underestimate. But not all listened. From the shadows, Madara Uchiha revealed himself, crashing the summit with his declarations of the Moon's Eye plan. His words chilled the hall, his presence overwhelming. In the original timeline, he had spoken to broken individuals, fractured alliances. But now, he stood before a united front, and more importantly, before Sasuke and Naruto standing side by side. The defiance in their eyes was unshakable. Madara's declaration that he would create a world of illusion, a dream of false peace, was met not with silence, but with fire. Naruto shouted back, his voice echoing that a world without free will was no peace at all. Sasuke's eyes narrowed, his hatred sharpened. But it was not for the leaf. It was for the man who had stolen his brother's life and turned his clan's story into one of tragedy. Madara, amused, vanished into the shadows, leaving the summit shaken, but more resolute. War was now inevitable. The 4th Great Ninja War would come. But this time, the pieces on the board were arranged differently. Back in Konoha, preparations began. The allied shinobi forces were formed, and among them, Naruto and Sasuke were no longer outliers. They were the centerpiece. Their presence inspired others. The young shinobi of the leaf, like Sakura, Hinata, Shikamaru, and Neji, trained harder, knowing they stood beside legends in the making. Sasuke especially grew into his role as a leader. His training pushed his Sharingan further, flirting with the edges of the Mangekyo. But unlike in another life, it was not born of despair and isolation. It was awakened by his bonds, his desire to protect, his grief for Itachi, his refusal to let Madara's vision overwrite the real bonds he had built. The war began like a storm. Armies clashed across vast battlefields, and the Akatsuki's resurrected shinobi rained terror upon the living. But within the chaos, Naruto and Sasuke carved their path. They fought beside each other like two halves of one whole, lightning and wind, fire and shadow. Each strike synchronized as though destiny had trained them for this very war. When they faced Edo Itachi, the encounter was transformed. In the original timeline, Sasuke met his brother with bitterness, anger, and confusion. Here, he met him with sorrow, with a clarity that was painful but grounding. Their fight against Kabuto was not one of forced alliance, but of family. Itachi, freed from Edo Tensei, looked upon his younger brother with pride. He saw the path Sasuke had chosen, a path not of vengeance against the Leaf, but of protection for those he loved. With a gentle smile, Itachi entrusted the future to Sasuke and Naruto both, knowing that in their unity, the shinobi world had a chance to survive what was coming. And what was coming was darker than any enemy yet faced. Obito revealed himself, a man twisted by grief, carrying Madara's torch. The 10 tails stirred, its massive power threatening to swallow the entire world. But unlike before, Konoha was not fractured, Sasuke was not absent, and Naruto was not alone. As the allied shinobi forces rallied together, Sasuke stood shoulder to shoulder with Naruto at the very center, ready to face the storm. The war was reaching its crescendo, and the bonds they had forged would be tested in ways neither had imagined. But here, in this version of history, the world's greatest duo was not divided by betrayal. They were together, and their strength would shake even the oldest legends. The war had ended, but the world did not change overnight. Villages that once distrusted each other still carried scars of history, and shinobi, who had been enemies on the battlefield, still looked at one another with unease. Yet in the center of it all stood Naruto and Sasuke, the two who had been the anchor for Konoha through the storm, and who had become symbols of something more, a possibility of unity that had never been seen before. Their survival through everything that had come to pass meant that the story of Konoha itself could finally move forward without the burden of endless tragedy. And the Uchiha name, once spoken with fear and suspicion, was finally spoken with pride. Sasuke had not left, and that single choice had rewritten everything. He had trained under Kakashi for years, never straying from his path, but sharpening it, pushing his Sharingan further than anyone thought possible. With Naruto beside him, the two rivals grew stronger in ways that complemented each other, fire and wind intertwining Rasengan and Chidori growing sharper, and their bond keeping them balanced whenever one threatened to stumble into darkness. Because he never left, Sasuke had been there when the Akatsuki first made their moves, and his presence had been the key to resisting them. Even Itachi, when confronted by his brother, had found not hatred in Sasuke's eyes, but a determination that was rooted in love for his village. That had changed everything. By the time the war reached its final stages, Sasuke had already awakened the Mangekyo Sharingan. His bonds had not been severed, but strengthened, and so the eyes he gained did not pull him into despair, but sharpened his will. When he fought alongside Naruto against Obito and Madara, it was not as an outsider seeking vengeance, but as Konoha's proud Uchiha heir. His Susanoo, blazing in the battlefield beside Naruto's Kurama avatar, became a sight that filled allies with hope and enemies with fear. Together, the two of them had proven that the leaf was strongest when it stood united, not divided. And yet, even after the war, Sasuke could not rest. Though the fighting was done, he still carried within him the weight of his clan, of his brother, and of the fragile peace that had been born from so much blood. He understood better than anyone that peace was not permanent, that hatred was not gone, but only waiting to be stirred again. And so, in this new future, Sasuke chose a different path than wandering the world alone. He remained in Konoha, not as a shadow, but as a protector who stood proudly under the same sun as his comrades. He trained the next generation. He advised Naruto when his friend struggled under the weight of diplomacy, and he watched carefully for the faintest ripples of darkness that might try to rise again. Naruto, who eventually became Hokage, relied on Sasuke more than anyone else. Where Naruto's boundless optimism carried him forward, Sasuke's sharp eye and unshakable logic balanced him. Their bond was no longer simply rivalry, it was partnership, the kind that shaped nations. When the time came for Naruto to sit behind the Hokage's desk, Sasuke was not far away. He remained a constant presence in the village, a reminder that the Uchiha name was no longer tied to rebellion or destruction, but to salvation. Children born in this era did not whisper about the clan with suspicion, but instead looked up to Sasuke as one of the heroes of the war. This also changed the path of countless others. Sakura's bond with Sasuke grew deeper without the long years of absence and uncertainty. She became his equal, not a girl waiting for him to return, but a kunoichi who had grown beside him, fought beside him, and supported him as he bore the burden of his clan's legacy. Together, they built a family in a time of peace, and their child grew up not in a world where the Uchiha were nearly extinct, but in one where their name was honored. Kakashi, too, was proud. His students had remained together, had grown together, and had become stronger because of their unity. The tragedy he had feared, of his team being torn apart, had never come to pass. And beyond Konoha, the ripples spread even further. The allied shinobi forces had seen firsthand the strength of the bond between Naruto and Sasuke, and the legend of their partnership became a story told across villages. It was proof that strength did not come from solitude, but from connection. When other villages rebuilt, they looked not just to themselves, but to their allies. And slowly, walls that had stood for generations began to crumble. The possibility of lasting peace was no longer just a dream. Still, Sasuke knew peace was fragile. He remembered Madara, he remembered Obito, and he remembered the way hatred could spread like fire in dry grass. He vowed never to let history repeat itself, and with Naruto beside him, that vow had weight. The two of them, each carrying their own burdens, ensured that the shinobi world would never again fall to the cycle of endless revenge. In quiet moments, Sasuke sometimes thought about the path he had nearly taken. The night he could have left the village, the temptation of Orochimaru's power, the lure of revenge that could have consumed him. He wondered what kind of man he would have become if he had walked away from Naruto, from Sakura, from Kakashi, and from the village that had given him everything. He could see it clearly in his mind, the lonely road, the hatred that would have burned him from the inside out, the endless cycle of fighting until nothing remained. And then he would look at what he had now, the warmth of his comrades, the peace in the village, the future his clan could have. And he knew he had chosen correctly. The leaf had not betrayed him, nor had he betrayed it. Instead, they had grown together, scars healing into strength. Minato's village, Hiruzen's village, the village Naruto had sworn to protect. It had survived its darkest trials and emerged into the light. And Sasuke, the boy who once stood on the edge of hatred, had helped guide it there. In the end, the story of Sasuke Uchiha was no longer one of tragedy. It was not the tale of a boy consumed by revenge, nor of a man who walked a lonely path in the shadows. It was the story of someone who chose to stay, who chose to protect, and who chose to believe in bonds rather than sever them. The rivalry that had once seemed destined to end in destruction had instead become the foundation of peace. And in the quiet nights of Konoha, when the stars hung above the village, Sasuke could finally rest, knowing that he had not only saved his clan's name, but had also helped shape a future where children would grow up without fear, and where the word Uchiha was no longer a curse, but a legacy of strength, unity, and hope.